30 seconds of the designated arrival time.
If they were out of that timing, they had to fly straight back without unloading. And that was carried out very strictly.
For ground staff, like Jeff Smith, this discipline was vital to keep the whole operation moving.
The busiest time we were doing probably 400 plus turnarounds a day. Aircraft coming in every few minutes. As soon as one touched down, another one would take off. As soon as that aircraft which had touched down had pulled up to the unloading apron, a German lorry would back up to the aircraft. As soon as the doors were open, they were inside unloading it. And they used to turn them around between 10 to 15 minutes, fully unloaded. If they were carrying coal or flour, they would be swept out. Every scrap of coal, of course, was picked up. Even spillage on the tarmac was swept up afterwards. And this went on 24 hours a day.
Absence of spare parts, such as starter motors, called for unusual operating procedures, unbelievable to today's young pilots.
I don't know whether you've ever realised, Luke, but we used to sometimes have to hand start these Dakotas. And this involved plugging in the starting mechanism into this socket up here. And two people would gradually turn the handle because there was a lot of pressure, and it would turn it slowly and get it up to speed, faster and faster, until the flywheel in the engine was turning over. Then we would pull a toggle inside the engine nacelle here, pull that down, and that would engage the engine and enable it to turn over. Once it was fired, obviously you've got to dodge the propellers. That was the tricky bit. Pull it away, signal up to the pilot, OK, and then it would be ready for takeoff.
There was a Russian army barracks there, and they had the habit of sometimes of shining bright lights up into the air just as we were taking off. But we retaliated by, on takeoff, holding the aircraft down low and flying right over their barracks at about 50 to 100 feet. And with an aircraft every 3 minutes, they soon got the message. They didn't like their sleep disturbed that much.
Well, I think if they turned really nasty, we wouldn't have had much of a chance. They were within 300 or 400 yards of us. We had no ammunition, no rifles or any armaments of any kind, and we'd have been overrun within minutes.
If we hadn't been able to keep Berlin alive for those 11 months, then the map of Europe would have changed significantly. We certainly stopped any movement that in the westerly direction that the Russians had in mind.
The Berliners had tremendous hardships to suffer in the cause of freedom as it was then. So I think those are the people who were the real heroes of the airlift.
So you've got a private pilot's licence. You've slipped the surly bonds of multiple choice exam questions and qualifying cross countries and are now boldly flying where other pilots might not have flown before. Over to Le Touquet for a spot of lunch perhaps, or up to 4,000 feet for some aerobatics. So much is possible now. Here's just one glimpse of life on the right side of a PPL.
I got my PPL about 4 years ago. I started to learn on a Piper Cub, which was great, but another friend of mine smashed that up when he had a problem with a wind change on final approach. So I ended up on a Cherokee, which was reliable, but not much else. Then things got a little bit more exciting when I came face to face with one of these, something my husband had wanted ever since he can remember.
I first became aware of the Stearman. Probably I was about 5 or 6 and obsessed with aeroplanes, and I had an old book called The Aircraft of the Fighting Powers, which was a 1942 record of the planes that were used in World War II. And of course it had one of these in it, which was called a Cadet, and it's one of the ones that I used to look at. And then, miracle of miracles, I got one. It's like a vintage sports car, and it makes the best noise of any airplane I know next to a Merlin in a Spitfire or a Hurricane.
Now we're both flying it, so there's all manner of places to go. Today we're off to the Shuttleworth Summer Show to try and win the coveted trophy for the best visiting Stearman. You've got to fly VFR, or Visual Flight Rules, in the Stearman, as it has a very limited instrument panel and you'd get easily disorientated in cloud. Besides, basic PPLs can't legally fly in cloud anyway. To do that, we'd need an IMC rating, costing around £1,500 for 15 hours training and a flight test.
Clear prop!
But with our simple beast, we're happy just looking where we're flying on a perfect summer's day. Having said we fly VFR, as Stearman pilots it's really a case of IFR, I follow railways. Open a map in this cockpit and you could lose it. Try and follow the wet compass and you'll be waiting 5 minutes for it to settle every time you change heading. What you really need to know is which way the A143 is heading, and if it's going the right way, follow it. Old Warden Aerodrome, just off the A1 near Bedford, and home to some of the finest vintage cars and aeroplanes in Britain, the Shuttleworth collection. Here, during the summer, crowds of picnickers park their picnic baskets, stretch out and relax to the drone of summer flies, ageing Bentleys, and the odd Merlin engine or two. And every year at about this time, Stearmans from all over the country flock here to compete for the trophy for the most original, best-kept Stearman. And we're here to repeat our 1995 victory.
We've done just about all we can now, so we're going to sit back and watch while Bruce and Dave show us just what the Stearmans can do when two ex-squadron leaders get behind the controls.
We're showing the aircraft off to the public, obviously, and that's the primary thing. It's a very old aircraft. It's big, it's beautiful, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. Being an old aeroplane, American as well, it's built like a brick outhouse. It doesn't have a lot of power. It sounds a lot, but when you look at the size of the aircraft, it'll need an awful lot of power to take it at a reasonable speed to do aerobatics. So we've broken the display down really to show the aircraft is aerobatic, and then to show close summation.
Meanwhile, back on the ground, the atmosphere is electric, as we spend a fingernail-biting few minutes wondering what the judge is thinking.
The winner of the Stearman competition, that is for the aircraft that I'd most like to fly home in, unquote, is Stearman number 28. And the winner is Ed Bolter, DFC, an ex-Pathfinder Mosquito pilot.
Next year.
Bold effort.
Next year.
And so we pack our picnic basket, check the weather and head for home again. It's always quite peaceful wending your way home in the cool calm of the evening air, with no slots to fit into, no briefings to attend, just a few stories to share between cockpits.
Originally flown in 1945, this was the first truly practical utility aircraft. It's the Bell 47 Sioux, which was immortalised by the film MASH and the television series Whirlybirds. Do you remember that? Just over 50 years old, it really is a... It was the first to be awarded a civil helicopter type certificate, which allowed Bell to sell it commercially. The Bell 47 was ordered for the United States Army in 1947, and it was with the services that the type really proved the usefulness of helicopters. During the Korean War, it operated as a Kazivac aircraft from 1951, attached to the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. In combat areas often under fire, the Bell 47 revolutionised medical support for the front line, transporting the wounded on outboard stretchers. The 47 was developed into over 20 different variants, and over 5,000 were built before production ended in 1973. This has to be one of the most instantly identifiable helicopters, with its open tail, tubular steel construction, the tail rotor control wires and the tail rotor drive shaft all open to the elements, as is the engine, a Lycoming flat six with 200 horsepower, giving it a maximum speed of 91 knots. But its major feature is this huge perspex bubble, perfect for observation, which after all was its main role. One of the differences between a modern helicopter and an old one like this is the twist grip manual throttle. On a modern helicopter you don't have to worry about it, it's done automatically. But in these old things, every time you raised and lowered the collective, you had to twist the throttle as well to keep the rotors in a very narrow band. So you'd see old Sioux pilots wandering around like this, so that it became an automatic reaction. Britain's Army Air Corps also operated a licence-built version of the Bell 47 known as the Sioux AH Mark I, and the Army used it for reconnaissance, light transport and casualty evacuation. Now this one, X-Ray Tango 131, is actually in the tender loving care of the Army Air Corps Historic Flight, and I must say I can't wait to get back in the cockpit. Oh, good girl. Well, it's wonderful to be back flying this aircraft that was the first helicopter that I flew 20 years ago. It's actually 20 years since I've been in it, so it takes a little bit of re-familiarising with it, especially with this manual twist grip throttle. And also, of course, with an old machine like this, although in its operational days it was pretty manoeuvrable, it's not something you can really throw around now. It was a little bit underpowered. This operational version has actually got a turbocharger, but that only really helps when you're hot and high, in other words, at a high density altitude. So it required considerable airmanship and good flying skills to make sure you didn't get yourself into trouble. But apart from that, a delightful helicopter to fly, very manoeuvrable, and of course with this huge glass bubble, fantastic visibility.
The clear, crisp air over New Zealand. Not the first place you'd look for the pioneers of a computer revolution in world aviation. This is Air Traffic Control, Auckland, a small room of traditional flight strips and radar screens. But in a quiet corner, a group of specialist controllers are conducting a trial that is changing the way we fly in the next millennium. The Future Air Navigation System, or FANS, uses satellites to link aircraft and air traffic control with a single system anywhere in the world and beyond radio and radar range.
Now what we do is, by digital signal, we transmit from our flight management computers directly to the air traffic controller our requests, and he also replies directly back to our flight management computer.
Right. So it's a way of talking to air traffic control when you can't, effectively?
Yes, that's right. It's electronically talking, and we do it all through satellite-based communications. If we were wanting to go around somewhere rather than fly through it, we can do this through an air traffic control request. Here, we can put in the requirement that we need, and in this case, we'll put in right 2 miles, and we will say it's due to weather. We will verify that request, and it now says, as you can see, request deviation up to 2 miles, and we then send that request to air traffic control.
Okay, so what we see on the screen here is an Air New Zealand aircraft that has come out of Los Angeles and on its route towards Sydney in Australia. The route of the aircraft was originally from this point here, and at this point the aircraft has downlinked a request for a reroute, which is now shown along the orange track.
And we get the response, and it says cleared to deviate up to right 20 nautical miles to report back en route.
I think it's a major change in aviation that I have seen. Some people have compared it to the change between the piston engine and the jet engine.
Air New Zealand, Qantas, Cathay Pacific and United Airlines are turning the region into a vast laboratory to develop this technology. Already, FANS has reduced horizontal separation between aircraft from 100 miles to 30.
We're now in the Air New Zealand Flight Dispatch. Behind us on the right here, we have the old way we used to do business of keeping track of the aeroplanes with the strip systems. Dave is currently working on the new Eagle flight planning system, and is used to produce the flex tracks, the dynamic reroutes, and also used to monitor the en route performance of the aeroplanes.
What we have on the map here, this is Sydney down here, Los Angeles up here. This line here is the Great Circle, or the shortest distance between those 2 points. And then in our computer we have a variety of pre-stored routes which follow the promulgated airways that exist around the world, and they're there to cater for the variety of wind conditions that can change from day to day. The advantage with the fans route is it's not restricted to flying airways, and it can fly any route that it likes. And here we've brought up another route, and as you can see, it's a bit of a sine curve.
Constantly adapting aircraft routes saves time and around 5 tons of fuel on a Pacific crossing.
The satellite communications on board the aeroplane has allowed engineering to have real-time engine performance, whereas it used to be once we got within VHF contact of a ground station about 200 miles away. Whereas now, it's a problem shows up early, engineering can interrogate the aeroplane, and they can advise the crews on any necessary actions.
0105, roger, runway 25, 25 miles to run.
But FANS is not just about long-distance navigation. For the first time last month, satellites were used for a high-precision approach on a scheduled flight into Newark, a quantum leap forward. So, I've crossed the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, 13,000 miles in complete safety. And after our weekly investigations, I've started to understand how. Crossing the Pacific, I've done what people have been doing for thousands of years, from the sailors who steered by the stars to today's navigators, our aviators. And there it is, Sydney. And it still feels like an achievement.
The air show's gone around the world, and Fenella can finally set about enjoying the real benefits of what air travel is all about. And I'm looking at yet another FANS demonstration in the Isle of Wight. Computers are now tackling head-on one of the worst types of aircraft accident.
Well, CFIT, control flight into terrain, unfortunately, happens to be the #1 problem that we have in airplanes. When ground proximity warning system, the original system, was installed, we saw a tremendous reduction in the CFIT accidents. However, it did not eliminate them.
The enhanced ground proximity warning system correlates the aircraft's position on a digital map of the world, warning the pilot of approaching obstacles much earlier.
Now, as we approach the terrain, the system looks ahead and above us. Now, the terrain's already being displayed 2.5 miles and more than a minute.
Caution, terrain. Caution, terrain.
There's our caution terrain warning. Now, within approximately 30 seconds of impact from the terrain, the display will change to red.
Caution, terrain. Terrain, terrain. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up. Pull up.
Now that gives us about 30 seconds warning.
Pull up. Pull up. Pull up.
I believe that with the terrain display and the earlier warnings that we will virtually eliminate this problem for good.
But just as computers appear to make it even safer to go in the air, suddenly they face their biggest test. What will happen to the world's most computer-reliant industry when the millennium bug strikes next year? To fly or not to fly on December the 31st, 1999.
Jane Garby, who is the administrator of the FAA, has publicly announced that she's already booked her flight to be flying with the Secretary of Transportation.
One major European airline isn't convinced.
So KLM is seriously thinking about having all aircraft grounded at the change of the millennium.
I have talked extensively with the major manufacturers about this, and both certainly Boeing and Airbus say they don't have a problem.
That's not the whole story, according to Airbus.
Honestly, I think that not all suppliers identify this issue, and in fact, we have not set rules consistent enough because we are learning like everybody.
Aircraft aren't the only problem. Britain's Civil Aviation Authority, responsible for all aspects of flying safety in the UK, are testing the Air Traffic Control Service, which should be Millennium compliant this year, and they'll withdraw operating licenses from any airlines, engineers or manufacturers who fail to comply by December 1999.
The major threat within the Millennium is just time. It's the fact that a small problem like the Millennium occurs millions and millions of times in all kinds of systems that communicate with each other. Air traffic control towers, air traffic control systems, airports, aircraft. We have to check them, and the fact that checking takes so much time is at this moment our major obstacle.
The trouble is, we'll never really know till the 1st of January 2000.
If you've been following our competition, Programme 4's winner was Paul Adams of Tunbridge, and here he is enjoying his trial flying lesson. We hope you've all enjoyed the competition and that you've learnt something as well as having a chance of winning. Here are the answers to last week's questions. The plane to identify was the Beechcraft Starship 1. The approach chart and visual is for Rio de Janeiro, and the RAF's nickname for the Tornado is the Mighty Finn. The flight sim software was won by 13-year-old Jonathan Hewitt of Newcastle upon Tyne. This week, our final prize, you can fly a helicopter, just like Julian. And for 5 runners-up, Farnborough videos. Here come this week's questions. Question 1. What is this aircraft? Is it A, an AH-64A Apache? B, a Mill M1-24P Hind F? Or C, a Bell AH-1F Huey Cobra? Question 2. Before the Second World War, Imperial Airways was Britain's major airline. In what year was it formed? Was it A, 1922, B, 1924, or C, 1937? Question 3. We saw the Gazelle helicopter earlier. How long has it been in service with the Army Air Corps? A, 25 years, B, 27 years, or C, 30 years? Your answers please by phone call on 0891 747 444. You'll be reminded of the questions and all you have to do is answer the 3 in the correct order. This is your chance, remember, to take to the air in a helicopter. Lines close at midnight on Sunday, and as this is our last programme of the series, we'll announce the winner and give you the answers next week on CFAX page 619. Hope you enjoy the challenge, and good luck.
Hong Kong International, the world's newest and most sophisticated airport, capable of handling, eventually, a staggering 90 million passengers a year.
Monday morning, touchdown with style. The airport opens with the world's longest ever commercial flight. A young British couple arrives in triumph, the very first passengers into this massive new airport.
The old Kai Tak airport has been a paradise for aircraft spotters, but a nightmare for those living under the flight path. Midnight, Hong Kong, July the 5th, and the last official Kai Tak customer comes into land. Just a few minutes later, the lorries leave for Chek Lap Kok with the final items of airport equipment. But what still remains of Kai Tak is the memory of one of the world's most challenging final approaches. We joined Cathay Flight 461 one last time to savour a great landing as it passes into aviation history.
And the autopilot's coming out. Oh, the throttle coming out. Now, welcome. I am visual.
Cathay 461, touchdown wind currently 110 degrees at 14 knots. However, it's gusting up to 20 knots. Up to 20 knots crossing from the left runway 13 clear to land.
Clear land runway 13, Cathay 461.
500 feet.
Check.
Plus 15 and 700. Plus 15.
Cathay 461, no need to acknowledge wind check. Touchdown 100 degrees 11. Midpoint 090 degrees at 19 knots.
Plus 15 and 600. Plus 15.
341, good afternoon. Continue approach report again at the outer market.
Plus 15, 900. Plus 15.
341, good afternoon. Continue approach report again at the outer market.
Plus 15, 900. Plus 15, 30. 10. The air show has landed. We're temporarily grounded, so until we meet again, from all the team, Bye-bye.
Sleek Italian style for BBC Two next in Top Gear, while on BBC One now it's the craziest time of the year for the shop.